Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Ooley, and this is episode 171 of the Forge of Freedom. Today, I'm actually sharing part of a book. It's included in a book, anyway, by Lawrence Reed. It's in his book, Are We Good Enough for Liberty? And I'm sharing a companion essay to that book called Liberty as a Life Philosophy. I often refer back to this book by Lawrence Reed, Are We Good Enough for Liberty? In fact, I referred to it in the last episode with Professor Yamani, talking about responsible gun ownership. And I think for those who don't know, I recorded an episode with Lawrence Reed about his book, episode 40. I'll link to that in the show notes for those who are interested in that discussion. There's also a link in the show notes to the book, as well as the essay that I'm sharing today. But I think that it's a good practice to reflect on our character, to sort of take an inventory about how we're doing as individuals. Because remember that the initial justification for government is that people are not angels, that people are not inherently good. And if they were, then government would not be necessary to guard against the worst tendencies that people have. I happen to disagree with that, a lot of the assumptions that are built into that justification for government. If people are bad, how can we trust people to govern other people? That's another problem. But nevertheless, the impulse to govern the bad behaviors of others is the initial justification for government. And so to the extent that we can self-govern, to the extent that we can be good people, that reduces the impulse to govern or to expand government, which is necessarily an imposition on freedom. So I'm going to share this essay, Liberty as a Life Philosophy, because I think it's instructive. I think it's helpful to instruct us in terms of what it takes to live a life in pursuit of freedom. And so this is at fee.org. Again, I'll link to this in the show notes. But this essay is drawn from Lawrence Reed's book, Are We Good Enough for Liberty? And I'm going to start out here with the note from Lawrence Reed about the essay. He says, I challenge my readers, and he's referring to his book, Are We Good Enough for Liberty? I challenge my readers to ask themselves, are we good enough for liberty? In the following piece, I will ask a second question that is the other side of the same precious coin. Do we believe in liberty enough to be good? In other words, will you treat the ideas of liberty as mere fodder for political posturing and internet debates? Or do you love liberty enough to embrace it as a life philosophy? The future of freedom hinges on the answer to that question. So please read on. And so we'll get into the essay here. Again, Lawrence Reed, Liberty as a Life Philosophy. FEE's eminent founder, Leonard E. Reed, often opined that it was the duty of every lover of liberty to introduce it to others as a life philosophy. It's a phrase we at FEE still use today and every day. We're able to preach it with conviction because we practice it with passion. What does it mean to regard liberty as a life philosophy? First, allow me to offer a few words about what it doesn't mean. If liberty is your life philosophy, you're not its fair-weather friend. You stick with it in good times and bad because its fundamental virtues are independent of what others think of it. Its truth rests on its inherent merit, not on shifting perceptions. Its immediate prospects for success may fluctuate, but your commitment to it shouldn't. You don't apply a life philosophy to certain aspects of your life and not others, as did the soybean farmer who once told me with a straight face, Larry, I'm for free markets and no subsidies for everything but soybeans. Furthermore, if your speech, tactics, or behavior conflict with liberty's high standards, if you're turning people off to it instead of winning them over, then you're defeating one of the main purposes of possessing it as a life philosophy in the first place. It ought to be something so lofty and universal that you're proud to live it and delighted when others choose to do so too. A life philosophy is neither superficial nor fleeting. You don't embrace it because it's convenient or fashionable or even profitable. It's deeper, more holistic and lasting than that. It ought to be rooted in ideas and conduct that are right, relevant, and uplifting. It should cause you to be remembered someday as a man or woman whose consistency and example gave the world a model worth emulating. If you were to choose today the epitaph that will appear on your headstone after you're gone, which from these two lists would you pick? Or perhaps the better question is, which one most accurately describes you? List A. He said it, but rarely meant it. No one ever knew what she stood for. Left the world as if he was never in it. Couldn't see further than herself. Subtracted more than he added. Honest and upright, but only when others were watching. List B. He made bedrock principles soar. What you saw was what she was, no pretense or prevarication. Devoted to all the right things in word and deed. Loved life and liberty, and others loved him for it. She set standards to which every decent person aspires. The golden rule was his life in 3 words. No good and self-respecting person would want to pick from list A, though the world is full of people who would have to if they were completely honest about it. What a dreadful shame to die never having lived a life that amounted to anything more. You can certainly commit your life to many things, to God, to truth, to family, to the future, etc. They are not necessarily mutually exclusive. I just want to make the case here, building on the previous essay and the title of this book, Are We Good Enough for Liberty?, that liberty is right up there close to whatever the best thing is. That's because, by definition, it makes it possible for you to fully commit to any or all of the other good things and enjoy the benefits thereof without arbitrary hindrance. A life philosophy is made up of 2 components. The first is how you see yourself. The second is how you see or interact with others in society. Though these 2 components are distinct on the surface, they should actually be seamless and integrated, one with the other. If they weren't, then your so-called life philosophy would be contradictory and schizophrenic, as if you had 2 lives and 2 philosophies. It would be like a thief arguing that theft is a good thing if he's stealing from you, but bad if you're stealing from him. Intellectual integrity demands a logical consistency, not selective and self-serving application. Let's look more closely at those components from a liberty standpoint. How you see yourself. If I were a socialist or a communist, I'd probably see myself as someone else's victim, or maybe as an insignificant piece of something more important, a mob, a group, a class, or whatever. I would likely subordinate myself to the collective will as determined by some powerful, influential person with a megaphone. I would seek political power over others as I convince myself of my own good intentions. I'd spend most of my time trying to reform the world and relatively little time attempting to improve myself. But I'm a lover of liberty, a libertarian, if you will, so I see myself as one of a kind. I'm not exactly like anybody else who ever has lived, and neither are you. To be fully human, to be fully me, I need things like choice and responsibility. I needed a mommy at age 5, but certainly not at 25 or 65. Maybe on a given day, I'm a victim of somebody, but I'm in charge of how I react to that. If I let it paralyze me, I'm simply solidifying and reinforcing my victimhood. To be called a common man is no compliment because it's not the commonness that makes me who I am, but my uncommonness. I relish the best, the heroic, the man or woman who carves himself out of the rock of commonality. No matter how many times other people may tell me how or what I should think, I will think for myself. If that means coming to conclusions no one else agrees with, so be it. I'm especially eager to stand apart from the crowd when the crowd is wrong. I'm not so full of myself that I think I know enough or am sufficiently fit to manipulate others like pieces on a chessboard. I want to learn and grow from now until I breathe my last. I happen to be a Christian, incidentally, so I believe God made me for a purpose. With His help, I will carry it out to the best of my ability. It may not be your purpose, but you didn't make me, and you can't live my life for me. Not peacefully, anyway. I will leave you alone if you leave me alone, and we'll celebrate our differences in peace and commerce. All this is empowering, extraordinarily so. I can employ my uniqueness to make a difference in the world. I might even be able to change it profoundly, perhaps as much as those who led the fight to end the age-old institution of slavery. I'm not just another drone in the anthill, after all. I can be a superb parent, a fantastic teacher, a remarkable influencer, a great friend. I can invent, produce, and innovate. I can be a risk-taking entrepreneur, adding value to society. I can do things others won't or can't, and in so doing, I might stimulate and embolden them too. The sky is the limit, and I respectfully decline to live down to somebody else's low expectations for me. Take charge of your life, and even if it's hard to be optimistic for society as a whole, you can still be optimistic for yourself and for those you love and affect. This is how I think each lover of liberty should see himself. It's certainly how I see me. And guess what? I would like nothing better than for you to believe the same thing about yourself. Freedom is what I want for me, and it's precisely what I want for you, unless by your actions you forfeit the right. I embrace the golden rule. I do my level best to treat others the way I would want them to treat me, which leads me to the second component of liberty as a life philosophy: how you see others. If I didn't believe in liberty, I might trust nobody but myself. I might see you as an obstacle to be ruled or overcome rather than as a partner I can associate with for mutual benefit. Taken to an extreme, that really isn't all that infrequent. Historically, my hostility to your liberty could devolve into tyranny, whereby you'll do as I tell you because I think your purpose in life is to serve mine. But I'm a lover of liberty, a libertarian, if you will, so it would be an affront to my principles to do to you what I would never countenance you doing to me. I have enough respect for you that when we differ, my first resort will be to employ persuasion. Compulsion is always my last resort, if I use it at all. In any event, I will never initiate force. I will use it only in retaliation, once you've proven yourself a threat by either using it against me or credibly threatening to do so. I believe it is a measure of my character that I deal with you from the loftiest of standards, with honesty, intellectual humility, patience, responsibility, mutual respect, courage, and self-discipline. Until you prove otherwise by your behavior, you are as entitled to those things from me as I am from you. I believe so strongly in those virtues of character, in fact, that I'm not going to let anybody's lack of them be an excuse to let mine slip. As a lover of liberty, I respect your right to think otherwise and do otherwise. I respect your right to be different, to be more successful than me, to be better than me at anything and everything, for that matter, and to gain the reward that others offer you in return. I will not resent you, envy you, drag you down, or try to forcibly make you what you're not. And I will not hire politicians to do these things to you under the mistaken assumption that doing so absolves me of some or all of the guilt. I will never succumb to that most intoxicating of evil motives, power over others. I'm better than that, and you should be too. To Leonard Read, the means had to be just as good as the ends. If you want to influence others on behalf of liberty, he argued, you've first got to be committed to self-improvement and then adopt a tolerant, inviting, and hospitable stance toward others whenever possible. He wrote, calling Joe Dokes a fool or stupid harms him little, if at all. The damage is to me in that I gain his enmity. He will no longer hear me, whatever wisdom I have to offer. This is to sink one's own ship, but this is not the half of it. In a word, the contemptuous subordination of another person, the entertainment of such a thought, even when silent, spells self-destruction. The better world begins with that man who attends to his inner freedom. Would you have your counsel more widely sought? Emulate that man. To find the way, ask yourself this question: with whom would I rather dine tonight? That man or an angry, know-it-all person? Embracing liberty as a life philosophy requires that you get your own affairs in order. Be a burden to no one. Seek nothing from others through the political process except that they leave you alone, and be a model in everything you do so that others will be inspired by your example. Take charge of your life. Accept all your responsibilities at home and elsewhere without hesitation. Get your mental attitude in shape. Have a healthy sense of humor, a good feel for both your strengths and weaknesses, a bubbly optimism and exuberance about making a difference in the world. Be a good citizen who respects the lives and property of others. You can't expect to be free if you support making others less so. Make your life a non-stop learning journey. Read and become as informed about freedom in all its aspects as you possibly can be. How we make our case is almost as important as the case itself. Rarely is it appropriate to come across in a hostile, confrontational, or condescending manner. It's never fitting to be arrogant, shrill, or self-righteous. We should convey our ideas in the most judicious, inviting, helpful, and persuasive fashion possible. We should be magnets for every open-minded person willing to learn. We can have all the facts and passion in the world, but if we lack people skills, we'll just be talking to ourselves. As indispensable as liberty is to the progress of humanity, its future is never assured. Indeed, on most fronts, it has been in retreat for years, its light flickering against the winds of ignorance. Irresponsibility, short-term gratification, and power lust. That's why it's all the more important that those of us who believe in liberty become more effective spokespersons. Toward that end, I offer here the well-worn top 10 list. These rules of thumb do not appear in any particular order, so I leave it to you, dear reader, to decide which ones are more important. I am convinced that liberty as a life philosophy offers so much that it makes life fulfilling that we owe it to ourselves to be effective exemplars and spokespersons for it. Number 1, get motivated. Liberty is more than a happy circumstance. It's a moral imperative worthy of every ounce of passion that good people can muster. It's not just about getting keyed up in an election year or responding to some issue of the day. It's always the difference between choice and coercion, between living your life or others living it for you and at your expense. If liberty is lost, it may never be restored in your time or in that of your children and grandchildren. For solving problems, avoiding conflict, and bringing people together, there's no worse course than politics and force, and no better path than liberty for peaceful exchange and cooperation to flourish. Number 2, learn. More precisely, never stop learning. To be an effective persuader, there's no good substitute for commanding the facts and the foundations. Know our ideas backwards and forwards. You can never read or listen too much economics, history, or philosophy to be the best persuader in your neighborhood. Let the other side talk in bumper stickers. Come armed with substance as opposed to slogans. Number 3, be optimistic. It's tiring and disheartening to hear the defeatists talk like this. It's over. The republic is lost. There's no turning back. Our goose is cooked. I'm leaving the country. What's the point of such talk? It certainly can't be to inspire. Pessimism is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Pessimists only disarm themselves and dispirit others. There's nothing to be won by it. If you truly believe all is lost, the best thing to do is to defer to the possibility that you may be wrong and let the optimists lead the way. That means leaving pessimism at the door. Number 4, use humor. Even serious business needs moments of levity. Seasoning your case with humor can make it more appealing, more human. If you can't smile when you're making the case for liberty, if you can't evoke a smile or chuckle from the person you're talking to, then you're on the way to losing the battle. Humor breaks the ice. Number 5, raise questions. You don't have to lecture every potential convert. Learn to deploy the Socratic method, especially when you're conversing with a rigid status ideologue. Most of the time, such people hold the views they do not because they're well acquainted with libertarian thought and have rejected it, but because they just don't know our side. A skilled line of questioning can often prompt a person to think about their premises in a way they never have before. Number 6, show you care. It's been said that people don't care what you know if they don't know that you care. Focus on real people when you argue for liberty. Laws and policies inimical to liberty produce so much more than bad numbers. They crush the dreams of real people who want to improve their lives and the lives of those they love. Cite examples of people and what happened to them when government got in the way of their progress. That said, don't dwell on the negative. Be just as generous in citing examples of what specific people have accomplished when they've been given the freedom to try. Number 7, seize the moral high ground. Liberty is the one socioeconomic arrangement that demands high standards of moral character. It cannot survive if people are widely dishonest, impatient, arrogant, irresponsible, short-term focused, and disrespectful of the lives, rights, and property of others. This truth speaks volumes about the moral superiority of liberty over all other systems. Humanity is composed of unique individuals. It is not an amorphous collective lump to be pushed around by elitists who fancy themselves our masters and planners. Any arrangement that purees our distinct lives into a collectivist blender is a moral offense. Use this argument to strike at the very heart of any opponent's case. Number 8, develop an appealing persona. A lover of liberty who knows all the facts and theories can still be repulsive and ineffective if he's condescending, vengeful, coarse or crude, self-righteous, or often in attack mode. This is why Dale Carnegie's classic How to Win Friends and Influence People should be on every libertarian's must-read list. So should Olivia Cabane's excellent volume, The Charisma Myth. Do you want to change the world or just beat your breast? Talk to others or talk to yourself, and slow down on the negativity. Some of us only talk about bad news. These are the folks who see nothing good happening anywhere. This attitude comes across as if they're telling you, stop having fun. The only good news is that there isn't any. If you think there is good news, we'll tell you why it isn't. This attitude wears badly and rarely wins converts. Heroes and heroic stories are all around us. Don't ignore them by dwelling on the scoundrels and the disappointments. Number 9, don't demand total and immediate acceptance. Have you ever run into a libertarian who lets you know that unless you fully confess all your intellectual sins and repent on the spot, you're a pariah? The history of progress in ideas provides few examples of wrong on everything transforming into right on everything in a momentary leap. We must be patient, inviting, and understanding. Know when the cracks are appearing in an opponent's wall and give him room to tear it down himself. Remember that all of us hold views today that we don't accept in our past. None of us come out of the womb with a copy of Hayek's The Road to Serfdom in our hands. Number 10, make allies, not enemies. A handful of cloistered, ineffective, but noisy libertarians fancy themselves arbiters of the faith. They behave as though the greater enemy is not those who embrace no libertarian precepts at all, but rather those who embrace many, but not all, libertarian precepts. So when they find a fellow libertarian who once held different views or departs from orthodoxy on an issue or two, they start to vilify him. It makes them feel good, but works against the larger cause. If we say we want to make the world a better, more liberty-loving place, we can't make it painful for anyone to move in the right direction. So are we in fact good enough for liberty? That question is best answered not in a collective fashion, but in a profoundly personal way, one man or woman at a time. So there you have it. There's the essay by Lawrence Reed, the companion essay to his book, Are We Good Enough for Liberty? I'd encourage you to save this essay, to refer back to it from time to time. I would categorize this essay along with one that I shared by Jeffrey Tucker about the habits of highly effective libertarians as essays that are helpful for self-reflection and for reflection not only as a libertarian but as a person, because remember, libertarianism and the philosophy of freedom or liberty as a life philosophy starts with the moral assertion that you own your own body. And it builds from that, the idea of self-ownership, and it builds from that moral foundation. And it requires, for its sustainment, as Lawrence Reed says, the cultivation of our own character, of responsibility, of, doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. And so that's exactly the idea behind the Forge of Freedom, is that liberty requires us to do difficult things, that it's forged through pressure, through heat, through friction that we encounter in life from day to day. And so this essay, Liberty as a Life Philosophy, really sort of captures the idea behind the Forge of Freedom and my whole motivation behind this podcast. I do this podcast for my own benefit, to help me in a self-reflective exercise to think about what liberty means, what it means to me, what it means about how I should live my life. And to the extent that it's helpful to any of you as the listeners, that's an amazing byproduct. So read this essay again, listen to the podcast if you just want to listen to the podcast again, refer back to it from time to time, and share it with others, and be an evangelist for liberty. You can't tell people what to think, but like Lawrence Reed says in this essay, plant the seed. When there's a crack in the wall, let them figure it out. And it takes time. It takes patience. But one thing that has always been surprising to me over the years, I've had discussions with some really bright people about various issues in the world, and I obviously come to it from a libertarian perspective. And we get to a point in the conversation where they seem to be coming along. They seem to be agreeing with the assertions that I'm making, or by virtue of asking them a question, they're arriving at the conclusion that I want them to arrive at, but by their own virtue, by their own rationale. And we end up at a point where they say, well, you're certainly consistent. So they don't have a refutation to the point or the argument, but they just jump ship. And their criticism of my view is that oftentimes it's consistent. And I sort of recoil internally when I hear that, because they're sort of rejecting what I have to say, but acknowledging that they've agreed to every point or premise along the way, but it doesn't arrive at the conclusion that they had hoped. And therefore they can just say, just sort of deflect, abandon ship, acknowledge that the consistency of the argument, but nevertheless maintain disagreement. But I've learned not to lose hope in those situations, because I believe, I'm optimistic anyway, that conversation has planted a seed to get people to question what it is that we were discussing, or a belief that they may have held. And so anyway, I just wanted to leave that as an example. And that's happened, I'm thinking off the top of my head right now, with at least 4 or 5 people who I developed a relationship with, a personal connection with, and engaged in some really meaningful conversation. So you will likely encounter that sort of thing when you are conveying the ideas of liberty, but don't be disheartened by that. Embrace liberty as a life philosophy. Forge freedom in your own life. And people will be, I think, intrigued by your way of life and by your way of thinking. And I think that's ultimately, I think, has a gravitational effect, a gravitational pull, because the ideas of liberty are so compelling. So that's where I'll leave it for now. Like I said, I'll leave this essay, the link to it in the show notes. Also, I'll link back to episode 40 with Lawrence Reed about his book, Are We Good Enough for Liberty? And I've got a few guests lined up in the near future. I'll be attending the NRA annual meeting with my father, Mike Ooley, in April. So I look forward to reporting back about that. I hope to have some good material to discuss upon our return from the NRA annual meeting. And in the meantime, thank you as always, for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like and subscribe to help us spread the message of liberty. As always, you can find the show on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, and X at Forge of Freedom. You can also find all the content at forgeoffreedom.com. Until next time, everybody, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.